Hey everybody, my name's Dalton. I'm a flight instructor here in Canada, and today I'm going to talk to you about the privileges, requirements, and costs associated with a recreational pilot permit, a private pilot license, and a commercial pilot license. So let's get into it, and I'll show you what I see every day. Starting with the recreational pilot permit, the privilege of that is it allows you to fly in Canada an aircraft with up to 4 seats, and there is some limitations. So you're limited to carrying one passenger on board, and you can only fly in day VFR conditions. So you're not allowed to fly at night with the recreational pilot permit. The requirements for a pilot permit, you got to be 16 years old, and then hold a category 4 medical. There's some hour requirements as well as far as the training goes. So you are required to pass a written exam from Transport Canada. You require 60% overall in each category. And some of the training requirements, you're required to have a minimum of 25 hours total flight time, and that must include 15 hours dual and 5 hours solo. So that's the bare minimum, which is doable, but it's not very realistic for the average person. What I see a lot more of doing this training, you're going to see somewhere between that 35, in that 35-hour range for a recreational pilot permit. So let's figure out the cost associated with a recreational pilot permit. We will assume that we're using a 172, which is a standard popular training aircraft. And the cost to operate that from your flight school is going to be $180 an hour. We'll also use a instructor fee of $70 an hour for all the dual flight requirements. So if we break this down and we say you're going to be 35 hours total with 25 hours of dual instruction and 10 hours of solo, the dual cost is going to work out to about $6,250, and your solo training is going to come out to $1,800. We'll also include about 10 hours of ground briefing time in there, so that's only your instructor fee for that. Plus your tax is going to come out to a total of about $9,900 for a recreational pilot permit. And that's just what I tend to see doing this training. Now, you could be lower than that. You also could be higher. So this is a pretty conservative estimate. And that's going to be your cost associated. It's going to change where you do your training, but it gets you a good idea. So that's a recreational pilot permit. You're not able to work for money with a recreational pilot permit. A private pilot license. So private pilot licenses are a little more common, and for the private pilot license, there is an age requirement of 17 years old, and you must have a category 3 medical. Once again, there is a Transport Canada written exam required, and you must have 60% or more in all of the subjects on the PPAER, it is called. Now for the flight training in a private pilot license. Initially, you're restricted to day VFR, but with a private pilot license, you are able to add ratings onto that. So you could add a night rating to allow you to fly at night. You can add an instrument rating to allow you to fly in clouds. You can add a multi-engine rating to be able to fly a twin-engine aircraft. So there, as well as a float rating to allow you to fly on floats. So lots of different ratings you can add on to a private pilot license, makes it a little more versatile for the type of flying that you'd want to be doing. The flight training requirements for a private pilot license is a total of 45 hours flight time, and then that includes a minimum of 17 hours dual and 12 hours solo. There's one last requirement. The private pilot license also has a 40-hour ground school requirement, so you'll have to attend a ground school and get a letter of recommendation at the end of that. But onto the flight experience, 45 hours total, 15 hours dual, and 12 hours solo. The cost associated with that, we're going to use those same figures, so $180 an hour for the 172, $70 an hour for the instructor. And once again, the 45 is a bare minimum. Not very often people are walking at the door right on 45 hours. So let's safely assume that it's going to take you 60 hours of total flight time to get your private pilot license. And that is broken down into 45 hours of dual and 15 hours of solo time. Your dual training is going to work out to $11,250. The solo is going to work out to $3,750. And for the private, we'll include an additional 20 hours of just instructor time for ground briefings. And that's a pretty conservative number, 20 hours of ground briefing there. That works out to $1,400. So a total, including your tax, of $18,500. So it is quite expensive. You could split this up over a year or 2 years generally on the training for a private license. That's gonna the timeline will obviously depend on weather and how often you're flying, but that's kind of a cost you could see with a private pilot license. Once again, it could be higher if you're having a hard time grasping some of the lessons, and it could be slightly lower as well. But I think 60 hours is a pretty realistic hour requirement. I know that's my private pilot license. I believe I was around the 60 to 65 when I finished that. The last license that we're going to talk about is a commercial pilot license. So the lowest license you're required to have in order to work as a pilot. So if you want to fly as a career, the minimum license you're required to have is a commercial pilot license. With a private, you cannot earn money as you fly. You would just be flying for your own enjoyment or to take friends and family up on the cost of yourself. So a commercial pilot license, you're required to have a Category 1 medical. You must be 18 years old. There's also a ground school requirement for the commercial pilot license. And it's going to allow you to work as a pilot. So you could also add the same ratings to a commercial pilot license. Once you're finished your commercial pilot license, you are able to fly at night without any additional ratings. But you can add an instrument rating to flying cloud. You can add a multi-engine rating or a type rating for different high-performance aircraft and so on. So the flight experience for a commercial pilot license is a total time of 200 hours, and this will include the time you've already put in towards your private pilot license. So you'll get your private pilot license first, and then begin working on your commercial, and that time will carry forward towards the 200 hours of total time. Of those 200 hours, you must have 100 hours pilot in command, so solo time, by the time you're finished the license, or to be able to get the license. And it's further broken down into 35 hours of dual instruction towards the commercial training itself, and 30 hours of solo time towards the commercial training itself. And you can the remainder of the time can be split up however you'd like. With the private and the commercial, there is further breakdown of the hours for cross-country hours. but you can get into those. They're not too relevant really. Once you begin your training, your instructor will clarify those for you. So the cost associated with a commercial pilot license. A couple things that we're going to assume for this. So we're going to say you got your private pilot license and your total time is 60 hours and you have 15 hours of solo time. The other 45 is dual. So we need a bare minimum of 35 hours dual. So we'll say that's going to be your dual cost for the commercial pilot license is 35 hours, which comes out to $8,750. And to meet the bare minimum requirements, you will have 105 hours of solo training to do, which works out to $18,900. So the commercial pilot license generally is fairly close to your 200 hours minimum time. Your instructor should definitely be able to have you finished by that. But if we use the 105 hours of solo time, 35 hours of dual, we'll include an additional 20 hours of ground instruction time covering some commercial briefings. Your total cost works out to $32,872, and that's on top of what you've already spent for your private. So using that example for your private, your total from 0 hours to a commercial pilot license is $51,400. So that's one of the major roadblocks of a flying for a career is the upfront cost of it. So it's quite expensive. Most likely you'll be looking at some type of bank loan or something along those lines to be able to go forward with your training if you're starting from a young age, fresh out of high school. But that's a realistic breakdown of the cost associated with each license and what you're able to do with each license. Now, another rating that you may be interested in after a commercial license would be a flight instructor rating. That's something that you can add to a commercial license, and then you're able to begin teaching other students, and it's a lot of first jobs for most people once they got a commercial pilot license. A few ways that you can reduce the cost of your training. Number one is just showing up prepared for each lesson. It's going to reduce the amount of time spent on the ground, and you're able to help reduce some of your ground instruction time. To help reduce the in-flight cost, if you're able to stay fairly current in your flying, so flying once a week, for example, it's going to limit the amount of review flights that are conducted. If you're not flying for a month and then coming back, you're going to have to do a review flight of everything you've learned up to this point. And those add up over time, and they increase your overall time required for the license. So if you're able to stay current with the flying, those students tend to do a lot better just because they don't get rusty, and you don't have to do the review flights. You can have a smooth progression towards your flight test, which is required at the end of each lesson or each license. So those are the two best ways to help reduce your cost if you're doing your training at a flight school. Spending the time at home, doing the homework, showing up prepared, and staying nice and current with your flying. So I hope this video was beneficial to you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I can help you out with those. So thanks for listening.